everybody. How are you? It is a pretty dreary, rainy Tuesday afternoon, and I was supposed to do the stream last night, but I ended up being too tired, so I just shifted it to this afternoon, which made my husband happy because now he gets to listen in at work. But we're going to be taking a look at the temper tantrum that Gary had the other night after he got off of my stream. Because he really, really didn't seem to like not being allowed to disrespect me on my own channel. And of course, my being a woman, he took some issues with that. So that's kind of funny. So he made like a, I don't know, it was like a 20-minute video afterwards. Let me see. Didn't even spell my name correctly, which is hilarious. He was such the big mad that he mistyped my name in the video title, which is great. Yeah, it's 21 minutes long. But as soon as he had to deal with the consequences of not being allowed to be disrespectful to me on my own channel, he had to start dropping the sexist comments. One of the first things he did was he messaged me on Skype and then removed me because, that's a thing you do, I suppose. But this is what he said. Cults do the same thing. God exists. Just suppress the truth in unrighteousness. If you're too weak to debate, do the dishes and let the men speak. So it's like, Gary, are you really that immature that you can't handle being told to mind your manners in somebody else's stream? I gave you enough warnings. It's not like I just went up and removed you. I gave you a warning that if you continued to behave the way that you did, you were going to be removed. And you had 3 tries. So, that's on you. When you show up at somebody else's stream, you're respectful to them. And I was nothing but respectful the entire time we conversed on both YouTube and Skype and here on my stream. Yet you just kind of divulged into the insults because you couldn't handle being told that you weren't allowed to do something. And that to me is kind of amusing and very telling to what kind of person you are, Gary. Doesn't speak to me. It speaks to you and how you conduct yourself. So wait, that's exactly what the problem is, crap. That's what it is. That he can't handle being disrespected by a woman. Hi, Esther. How are you? He has some major problems with respecting other people. And it's funny because from the moment that I started interacting with Gary the other day, he demanded respect right from the start. Like full out blatant, you're going to respect me or I'm not going to speak to you. Okay, that's fine. But at no point was I disrespectful. But the moment that he didn't get his way, he threw a tantrum like a little 2-year-old and started being disrespectful because I guess in his mind, that's okay. Hi, Todd. How are you? So we're going to take a look at his video because I got to add it on StreamYard. Give me a sec. I got to remove this. I wish there was a way to share 2 screens so that I could just flip from one to the other instead of sharing my entire screen. I know I make that sound more complicated than it really is, but oops. Nope. There we go. So for those that weren't here for that particular stream, basically what happened was this conversation was getting very spicy, which I don't have a problem with. I can handle spicy conversations when people get heated, voices raised, you talk over each other. That happens. I did it. My husband did it. Gary did it. I get it. What my problem ended up being is because Gary's argument was that he knows what I believe personally and tried to assert that back to me. And that I am not okay with, because unless you can tell the future or you can read other people's minds, There's no way for you to know what another person believes other than what they tell you they believe. You don't get to stand there and say, hey, I know what you believe, even though they're telling you the opposite. It doesn't take much to say, hey, can you tell me what you believe? And then that person tells you what they believe. Okay. But you don't get to stand there and say, you believe in God. I know you believe in God, because you don't know. There's no way for you to know that. Absolutely no way for you to ascertain what my beliefs are other than what I tell you I believe. And it wasn't the fact that I can't handle arguing with Gary, or, I don't have any comebacks, or I don't know the definition of a word, or blah, blah, blah. That is extremely disrespectful and shows how dishonest you are when it comes to having a discussion about religion, is when you stand there and you assert somebody else's beliefs to them. And Gary really doesn't understand that, because when we had our Skype text conversation, which I might go through that at a later date, but I'd be able to show that he just doesn't really understand what that means. So he thinks that he can stand around and tell other people what they believe, rather than taking the time to actually ask them what they believe. It's almost like he's very much like Darth Dawkins, where he doesn't know how to have a conversation. He's not interested in having a conversation or a dialogue. He just wants to preach to you, and that's it. He's not interested in any type of back and forth. And I think in seeing his interactions with other people online is very, very telling. And that's why Gary really just doesn't have a whole lot of people around him, and why people can't tolerate him, because he's not actually interested in talking to people. Gary is a notorious mind reader. It's true. Wow, he's got to teach me that. Too logical for Gary. Yeah, I noticed that logic's not a Gary strong suit. Telling other people what they think or feel, or what their motivations are, is pretty crappy. Exactly, it is. You can't have an honest dialogue if you're starting off right from the hop assuming what they believe or how they feel, or trying to anticipate what they're going to say, right? Like, what's the point of having a discussion when you're in that scenario? There's no point, because the other person's really not interested in dialogue. Both are Gary's. Both are from New Jersey. Coincidence? Not likely. All right. But anyway, he was really, really butthurt that I kicked him from my channel for being disrespectful. And, it's not like I didn't give him a chance. I full out gave him warnings that if he continued to behave the way that he was behaving, he was going to be removed. He didn't do that, so he was removed. And now he had to go on and make a stream and talk about all the reasons why he actually thought that I kicked him, when, I mean, it's pretty plain. Anybody can go back and watch that stream and see for themselves what happened. Hi, Cynthia. How are you? He's such a failure at what he does. Right. And you know what's funny is that he said to me in that stream that it's a Christian's duty to spread the gospel. Well, why do they have to spread the gospel? Well, in the hopes of spreading the gospel, you're supposed to lead people back to Jesus. You're supposed to plant those seeds so that the belief in God will grow, and eventually they will come to God, right? I don't think Gary is smart enough to realize that what he's actually doing is he's pushing people away. He is turning heads away from any type of belief. Because let me tell you, I went on my own journey of what it was to be a Christian. Because at one point I really did want to believe. I really did want to be a Christian. Had I met a Gary or a person like Gary at the beginning of my journey, that would have turned me off so fast. I would have not done any of the things that I did. I would have not have gone to church. I would have not read the Bible, done the Bible, anything. If I had met one of him first before I went on that journey, I wouldn't have gone on that journey at all, because he would have turned me away. He makes Christianity so undesirable that it just, I don't even want to consider it, because there are people out there like him, because I don't want to be like him. I think people like him are disgusting. because they're so filled with hate that they don't know what to do with it. And the way that Gary just kind of turns that around and dumps on atheists every single day, because I guess that's what makes him happy. He thinks that he's doing something, like, let's just say ultimately there actually is a God or a Jesus. Is he going to be able to stand up in front of his God and say, yeah, I showed people love. I led them to God because I wanted them to be saved? No, he's not going to be able to say that, because look at the behavior that he conducts himself online with, right? He is what I understand Christ to be, the exact opposite of it. I don't think Gary is smart enough. You just, right? Just like period on the sentence, problem solved. Yeah, I know. And it's funny that he's sitting there with with the tissue, because he's trying to imply that I'm going to be crying, but he doesn't really realize, and it's kind of over his head, that he doesn't grasp the fact that we're all laughing at how stupid he is, and I don't feel sorry for him. Can we get some Kleenex for G-Man? Atheist in Gary's mind just translates to all my imagined enemies from the internet. Yeah, he just kind of he lumps all of atheists into, and I've noticed in watching some of his conversations with other people, is that he kind of paints atheists with all one brush. He thinks we all believe the same thing, believe the same things, we talk the same way. I don't think he really understands what an atheist is. So that's maybe why he just kind of goes on the rampage he is because it's just the concept of an atheist is just too complicated for him. And he feels just so inadequate in his lack of intelligence that he lashes out, and usually, like, I'm the mother of 3 children. I've raised 3 children. This is common behavior in toddlers, right? They don't understand something, so they lash out, and then we have to very gently guide them in the right direction and try and teach them, in the hopes that eventually they grow up into adults that don't behave like Gary does. So I really think Gary needs maybe a timeout or two to maybe sit and think about how he's behaving and how that reflects on what kind of person he is. All right, so we're going to go ahead and we're going to start the video and see what he has to say. Let me know if you have any trouble hearing. I did have some technical difficulties earlier, so hopefully that's all sorted out.
Because I knew what was going on in her brain, okay? And I knew what was going on in her heart.
But see, he starts the video right off, and I knew what was going on in her brain, and I knew what was going on in her heart. No, you didn't, Gary. There's absolutely no way for you to know any of that. But you want to make up for this feeling of inadequacy in you, that you have to try and assert what my beliefs are, because you don't understand them. They're too complicated for you.
But Lady Avon, this is why I don't like talking to females. You guys.
Oh, see, we got to start. I don't like talking to females. Gary, I think we've kind of worked that out for ourselves already. But it's funny how he's going to try and say here that because I didn't allow him to disrespect me, that somehow translates into me being too emotional and not being able to handle him.
Control your emotion, okay? Your emotions. This just here's a Kleenex for your crocodile tears or whatever. But anyway, hello everybody.
I'd like to know where these crocodile tears were that he saw, because I mean, we were all having a good chuckle at Gary's expense. So if there were tears, they were tears of laughter, because Gary is stupid. He has a very skewed perception of an atheist. I personally think he has a misdiagnosed behavioral health issue, maybe more than one. That's a possibility. I mean, I can't make any type of diagnosis or anything like that. A personality disorder absolutely would explain some of his behavior, but I mean, I'm not a professional, so I wouldn't know. But even in the off chance that was correct, it's still not an excuse for him to behave this way and treat people this way. you know. And people like Shani seem to think that they can just use mental illness as a scapegoat and say, oh, well, I'm a BPD, so that's why this happened. Well, no, that's not. Like, it explains your behavior, yes, but you're still ultimately responsible for how you behave, right? So you can't say, well, oh, you just have to accept me treating you like crap because I'm BPD. No, you still can be held accountable for your behavior, whether or not you have a mental illness. Ooh, misogyny much? Yeah. Yeah. If I could click, there we go. My mouse is being dumb.
Sowing and Reaping YouTube channel. And today, what I want to do is I want to talk about my discussion with Lady Avon, just real quick. Since I got muted multiple times, which is no surprise, I kind of expect that when I'm dealing with atheists.
No, you should kind of expect that when you behave like a child and you're disrespectful to other people. What makes you think you have the right to sit there and disrespect somebody in their own space on their own platform? You don't just get to behave however the hell you want, Gary. That's not how the world works.
Which is why I do it to them so much when they come to my channel. Now that you guys see it happening on somebody else's platform, you guys can see why I do it on mine, right? But anyway, we was discussing whether or not God existed earlier today. We had a Skype conversation, and not a Skype conversation, a texting back and forth. And I personally believe that the conversation was all over the place.
It was.
I think when you're having a debate about
well, number one, we weren't having a formal debate. We were just having a discussion. He invited atheists to contact him on Skype to talk about why we're an atheist. And that's exactly what I did. I broke down why I believe what I believe, how I got to my conclusion that I don't believe in a God. It was very short, very to the point, and I just explained that I have never believed in a God my entire life. I have not believed in God. I explained why, and that was exactly what he asked for. And I tried to kind of stay on topic, but if you go back and you watch our stream, and even in our text combo, he just kind of jumps like all over the place. Like, if whatever his argument is, if it doesn't seem to work, then he just jumps to the next thing, or if he doesn't have the answer to an argument that you have, then you just jump to the next thing, and it leads the conversation in a million different directions, and it's kind of hard to follow. And me personally, that's why he tripped me up so much, because he wouldn't stay on topic and just kept jumping out all over the place. And like, even in the stream that we did, I answered him, and then he just kind of paused and went, so anyway, and then moved on. And it was just like, it's hard to follow. I have to give him this, as he did overwhelm me with how much talking he did, how much over talking he did, and how much jumping around he did on the topic. So it was very difficult to follow. And somebody like me, who doesn't have a whole lot of experience in having debates or discussions with people like Gary, I kind of got in over my head with that. Not that I don't know how to argue, and I tend to find I argue better in text form, because I can articulate myself much better in text form. So sometimes I can stumble over myself when I'm talking to people like Gary, who are just kind of like, it seems like his argument depends on dominating the conversation, and kind of like verbally taking over. And that if you're not quick enough with the right argument, he's going to see that as a win because you didn't come back fast enough. You know what I mean? When it's got nothing to do with the content of the argument. It's just got to do with the matter of, being as obnoxious as he was in that debate. In all likelihood, G-Man does have some issues, but never forget he is mean and likes to hurt people. Yeah. Well, mental illness is, like I said earlier, it is not an excuse to abuse other people. It's just not, It just means that you have to be more aware of how you treat people, right? Like, I have a mental illness. I don't talk about it a lot, but I try not not to let it control my relationships with other people. And I am very conscious of when I am feeling a certain way and want to lash out. You know, there have been times that my mental illness has made me want to lash out at people and hurt them just so that I can hurt them. But do I know? I know how to keep that in check. I have done my best to keep that in check. And some people like Gary just don't give a shit about that, right? You still have to take responsibility for your behavior. Yeah, exactly. And I mean, if G-Man was open and willing and had the self-awareness of his mental illness, if he has one, and he cared about what he's doing to other people, he might seek help and how to fix that. But I don't really think he has that. I don't think he cares enough. I don't think he gives a shit enough about other people to actually want to do that or change his ways, or even I don't think he's ever self-reflected on the way he's treated other people or what he's put other people through.
Whether or not God exists, according to these atheists, I think that people get caught up in their emotions a lot with this discussion. When we're talking about proof, for example, that there are life on other planets, people don't get really emotional about that. When we talk about...
Sure they do. Talk to a person that's had an experience that they believe was an alien or a UFO and see how emotional they get about it.
People having evidence that a person can live to a certain age, people don't really get this emotional. You know what I mean?
But one thing I do want to mention too, though, is yes, there are a lot of people that get emotional over whether or not a God exists. I'm one of those people. I'll fully admit that. The reason why, though, is not for the reason that Gary thinks. See, Gary's trying to assert that I get emotional over this because he thinks that I really actually do believe in God and I'm just suppressing it so I can be unrighteous. No, that's not why I get emotional. The reason why I get emotional is because of people like Gary that assert that a God is real. And because they believe God is real, that means that they can use their religion to influence the laws that I have to follow. Right? So if your personal belief is trying to dictate how I live my life and what human rights I have, yeah, you're right. I'm going to get emotional because why should your belief have any effect on my personal life? Right? And just take the abortion debate as an example and what it's doing to the US right now. Right? Because of people like Gary, my right to control my own body is being taken away from me and my daughters. And that's something to get emotional about, right? Because you shouldn't have the right to take my human rights away because you believe a God is real. And yeah, that's something to get emotional about. If you can't convince them with facts, dazzle them with bullshit. It's his debate style. Yeah. Because there were a couple of times in the stream where I was just kind of sitting there a little dumbfounded, like, what the fuck did he just say to me? What? I don't, what? You know, like when he brought up aliens in our discussion, I was just like, what the fuck does that have to do with anything? But okay.
I mean, they bring whatever they have and you know, and they discuss it like adults. When people talk about evidence that a person is the thing that they claim, they don't really get emotional like that until you deal with atheism, where they pretend that they want evidence for the lack of belief of God, and they really don't. And
he totally fucked that up. I'm not looking for evidence of that, a lack of belief in God. I do not believe your God is real because I have not seen any evidence that personally convinced me one's exists. Simple as that. I know that's a very difficult concept for you to grasp, but that's just how it is. You don't have to accept it. And the few times that I did get the opportunity to ask you for empirical evidence that your God exists, you didn't deliver. Because there was a few times that I did specifically ask you, because you were talking about your relationship with Jesus, Gary, and he specifically said he had empirical evidence that he has a relationship with Jesus. And I asked him several times to provide that evidence. Did we get anything? Absolutely not. Which doesn't surprise me at all. Because honestly, what evidence could there be for having a relationship with a being that is supposedly outside of time and space? Like, that just is fucking ridiculous. To me personally, that sounds like somebody that belongs with a straitjacket in a padded room because they have a relationship with an imaginary being. You know, like we humor young children when they talk about imaginary friends, but somehow we are supposed to coddle these adults when they talk about having an imaginary relationship with Jesus. Like, that's just absurd to me. That doesn't make sense.
And I've been saying this on here since my first year on YouTube, that they don't give a hoot about no evidence.
I do.
Okay, they don't even know what the word means. And you know what I'm going to do for this?
Just for Gary, just for Gary, we're gonna bring it up. So evidence is the available body of facts or information indicating whether a belief or a proposition is valid or true. There you go. That's evidence, Gary. It's not a difficult concept. What I think Gary is trying to assert here, though, is that our standard of evidence is very different. So, because Gary has faith, his standard of evidence for a God being real is much, much lower than somebody like me who values truth, and I'm looking for evidence that something is true before I'm going to believe it. So it's not that we don't understand evidence, Gary. It's that we're on different pages about what constitutes convincing evidence for this particular argument.
For this particular channel, since atheists will not articulate what these words mean, since atheists will not sit down and talk about these things, I, G-Man, will. I'm going to sit back and I'm going to teach you guys what evidence is. I'm going to teach you guys what a God is again. And I'm going to teach. And
I noticed Drag reviewed our video the other day, and this was a big piece of advice from him, which is something it's funny is I've watched The Atheist Experience so many times. I should have known better, but we should have started the conversation off with defining what a God is. So that was my mistake. The fact that we left it far too in the conversation about what a God is. And oh, no problem, Esther. Thanks for stopping by, though. I appreciate it. The funniest thing about all of this is that he always thinks he wins arguments, even though a tell-all for seeing that he has no clue what he's saying when he changes the subject. Yeah, I mean, it's when you ask him particular questions, because I noticed that in our text conversation, that I had to ask him a couple of different questions numerous times before he kind of grasped what I was trying to ask him. And they were basically simple questions. One of the examples is he asked me what evidence would convince me. And he asked me that question several times over and over again. And even though I answered it each time that he asked me, he didn't accept my answer. He didn't like my answer. So to him, that's a non-answer. That's me avoiding the question. And that's not how that works. An answer is an answer, whether you like it or not. Right? And the fact that I was sitting there saying, I don't know what evidence will convince me. And I did give him a few examples of what I thought might be convincing, but ultimately, I don't know what evidence will convince me. And to him, that was like, well, maybe I need to ask her the question again, which is a typical Darth Dawkins tactic. I've seen Darth do that so many times. You know, if he doesn't like the answer to the question, he just asks the question again, thinking that you're going to give a different answer. And that's not how that works. G-Man only cares about his script. Yeah. Only the difference is that Gary's script is pretty chaotic and doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. And he gets very flustered if you don't follow it. Nothing you said would have changed that. No, I don't think it would have either. It's sometimes hard to remember these things in the middle of a conversation. It is absolutely, Drag, because like I was saying earlier in my stream, I argue much better in text because I can articulate myself much better with words when I'm typing them out, and I can go through and see what I'm talking about. You know what I mean? When I'm having conversations with people, because I'm kind of really inexperienced in doing it, I stumble a lot, or I, second guess myself about what I know. So I'm not as good at verbally having discussions as I am with text. And Gary definitely tripped me up big time.
Teach all of you again why atheism is stupid. Okay? The bottom line is, at the end of the day.
The bottom line at the end of the day, I didn't notice how much he said that until I started really paying attention to his videos. And it's just that particular line. The bottom line is, at the end of the day.
Lady Haven and they and her husband made a rookie mistake, the same mistake a lot of other atheists make who are not used to debating. And they said that no one.
It wasn't a debate, it was a discussion. It wasn't a debate, because a debate you prepare for, right? You have a set topic. This was a discussion, if you could even call it that. It was just so all over the place, I don't even think I would label it as a discussion, My best plan for engaging G-Man, which I really don't anymore, is just to let him talk and make himself look foolish. Works every time. Yeah, I should have. And the thing is, if he wanted to come back on here and try that again, I would probably do the same thing. But I watched Jules review our stream the other day. And Jules says that she doesn't engage with G-Man unless it's to troll him. And I think at this point it would be the same for me. Because there's really, in all my time in talking to Christians, I've done a lot of debating in Facebook groups. And you could kind of tell right off the hop when you're talking to someone whether they're going to be someone that you can actually have a useful discussion with, as opposed to somebody like G-Man who only wants to hear himself talk, right? There's going to be no discussions with G-Man. He's not going to let you talk. He's not going to absorb any of the material that you're talking. He's just going to think that he's going to win every time. It's like the pigeon on the chessboard, right? He's going to shit all over the chessboard and strut around like he won, even though he didn't. But that's basically what G-Man is. So there's no point in trying to have an honest engagement with him in any way, because it's just going to end up frustrating you. You're going to get pissed off. And I mean, after the stream, my husband and I had a really, really good chuckle, and we talked about things that we could do better when engaging Christians in the future. But I don't think that Gary is really worth the time or the effort to try and engage honestly anymore. It's just not. I feel like these conversations or debates really go nowhere with G-Man. He's unable to understand and refuses to listen to respect the other person. Right. And I mean, when I kicked him out of my stream, I was very specific in saying, I'm kicking you out because you're disrespecting me on my stream. It has nothing to do with who's winning the argument. Somebody's upset. I can't handle these wonderful facts that you're throwing at me, Gary. No, it was just the simple fact that you were disrespecting me on my own stream. But he's got to turn that around to save face and say it was because I couldn't handle the arguments, when that's just simply not true. And anybody could go back and watch my stream and see for themselves. Jules has the right idea. He's not an honest interlocutor, so your efforts would be wasted on G-Man. Yeah. And I kind of had to learn that lesson for myself. I mean, I wanted to try. And I mean, it was good content. It was good for a laugh. But really it was kind of a waste of time. It really was, because there was no point to it, right? We just got to see G-Man be crazy yet again. But I am always interested in trying to talk to people. Even if it turns out that it was a mess like this was, I'm still learning something, right? I'm still learning how to deal with these types of Christians and have conversations with them, right? My husband and I were talking about my futures for my channel and how my goal is to eventually have open rooms where Christians come in and talk. And I would like to have dialogues with them. But when it comes to the precept Christians, and it comes to a lot of philosophy, I don't have a lot of education in philosophy or epistemology or everything kind of tied to that. So I have a very difficult time dealing with the precept Christians because I'm not entirely familiar with those arguments or how to counter them, right? But even though it's not a subject that I'm really interested in, I still want to sit down and learn how to do it, because if my goal is to talk to Christians or to continue to talk to Christians, it's something that I'm going to come up against that I'm going to have to learn how to deal with, right? So it's going to be a necessity. So I see this whole interaction as this is teaching me things, right? So next time I have a conversation with a Christian, we're going to start off the conversation with definitions. What's a God to you? What constitutes evidence, right? And just I'm going to be able to set myself up a little bit better next time so that I don't feel so overwhelmed with the conversation.
No one's ever proven that a God existed and then put a period at the end of that. Okay? Bottom line is, at the end of the day, guys, God is proven to exist in a scientific a long time ago. Already showed that with Christmas is a Lie and the playlist they did on the truth about atheism. I did that a billion different times already. So I'm not even going to go through all of that.
That I don't even, Christmas is a Lie. I have no idea what the hell he's talking about. I'm curious though. I'm going to have to write that down, see if that's it.
Most people don't even know what the word God means. Okay?
I read the definition to you, Gary.
How I use a deity or a God when I'm talking about it is not going to be the same when you're talking to a pagan. A pagan isn't going to, and when I say a pagan, I mean like a Von Helton or whatever, right? And Von Helton's
this is one of the things that I noticed with his argument, and where I think he was going with that argument, and I tried to counter it, but it just got too chaotic. And I used my lamp as an example. So when I was reading the definition of what a God is, he was saying that basically anything that people worship as a god, like, for example, the sun, that means it's a god. So he's using a very vague definition of, you can worship anything, call it a god, and that's a god to you, so that should be evidence of God. And that really doesn't make sense, right? Because just because you believe something is a god doesn't actually mean it's true. I could sit here and I could pray and worship the lamp that's sitting here on my desk. Does that mean my lamp is a god? No. But I believe that it's a god. So does that mean it's true? Well, according to Gary, it seems that, yeah, that would make my lamp a god. And, that was my fault for not, kind of setting the stage there for us being on the same page with the definition of God. He's talking about Christmas traditions are mostly rooted in paganism, and that Jesus wouldn't have been born in December. Oh. Well, I mean, I knew that. I mean, most of what I know is, Christmas traditions, and Christmas itself was just trying to take over another pagan tradition, right? Everybody was worshiping Yule or Saturnella, and they were just trying to kind of weasel Christianity into the way of things. That's a very basic way to look at it. I know it's much more complicated than that. I don't want to kind of dive off topic, but I get it. Yeah, there's a lot of pagan traditions in Christmas, yada, yada, yada. But okay. But, and I just wanted to throw it out there that my husband and I did have a conversation after the stream about pagans worshiping the sun, when he understands that he was incorrect in saying that pagans don't worship the sun. That has been all sorted out, because at one point I was kind of dipping my toes into the pagan pond, and I don't want to say I worshipped the sun, but it was one of the deities that I recognized in my path of learning, I guess. It was Mother Moon and Father Sun. So, but that has been sorted out. But ultimately, the point that we were trying to make is that just because you worship something as a god doesn't mean that it actually is a god. And we could have solved that problem by defining what a god was before we started the conversation. So next time, I know that's the first thing on my to-do list.
It is not going to be the same as a person who is in Islam. Okay? And their definition isn't going to be. So when you hear them say things like no one's ever proven that a god exists, it's stupid. There are people out there that worship poop. There are people out there that worship urine. There are people that go out there and they worship the star and the moon. They say.
Did he just go and say that people worship poop and urine? What kind of kinks does Gary have that that's the first thing he goes to? I mean, I don't want to kink shame. I really don't want to kink shame, Gary. If that's the kind of thing that you're into, okay, great. But personally, no thanks. Nope. Gross. Hi, dude,
Well, it's a
brothers.
star. Well, duh, that is a star. Most people worshiping the star knows that it's a star. They still worship it as a god.
Okay, but that doesn't mean that it is, Gary. Doesn't mean that it is.
The Egyptians used to worship the Nile River. You'll say it's not a god because it's water and it's a river. Mm-hmm. It's a body of water. You know what I mean? And it's like they know it's a body of water, but they worship it as God. And there are reasons that they...
And you know, that's fine. If you want to worship anything out there as a god, personally, go for it. It has no effect on me, personally. If you want to worship my lamp as your god, go for it. I don't care. But it's when you turn around and try to assert to me that it's a god and that I need to worship it as a god, then we have a problem, because then you have to prove to me that it is a god. And my definition of God is not going to match what your definition of God is, which is, again, that could have been solved by if I had just made him define it at the beginning. That's not how that works. Nope, it's not.
They worship these things that God means idolatry. It's not of God. It's at least not of the God of the Bible or whatever. But they do it because they believe that this river is going to provide healing properties. Or somebody might worship the sun because the sun is responsible, because they believe that they worship the sun. It's going to cause...
do this a lot where he just kind of speaks for other religions and what other people believe? Because, I mean, I don't think he should be sitting here trying to speak for other people. That's just me, though.
Their crops to grow. The reason why I'm pointing this out is because when we're talking about atheism and atheism and whether or not God exists, we're dealing with atheism and theism. Theism and Christianity are not the same thing. So there was like back and forth between saying that
and that's what he was trying to do. He's trying to say a theist and a Christian are two separate things. And Gary, that's just not correct. It's not correct at all. Every Christian is a theist, but not every theist is a Christian. So, I mean, and like when it comes down to it and you're trying to prove a God exists, I mean, that's kind of the foundation of Christianity, right? You can't have Christianity if you don't first believe in a God. So I don't really understand why he's trying to differentiate between the two. And he got all like his panties all in a knot about, well, we were talking about Christianity when we're talking about theism. Like, what does it matter? You know, and everybody knows that you're a Christian that believes in Jesus. So we know which God you believe in. So why can't we stick to the topic of what God you believe in and why, and you having evidence for that particular God? Why do we have to jump around to all these other beliefs when they've got nothing to do with the conversation, right? G-Man seems to think he knows everything about everything. Yeah. He's very, very arrogant.
Universally, there's no God, and then specifically focusing on Christianity all over the place and whatnot, without defining their terms, without setting rules and parameters for the discussion, getting overly emotional, Lady Haven. And again, here's your Kleenex. Because you don't know what you're doing when you're having a conversation with another adult. Okay?
Aw, Gary's so upset that I kicked him from my channel for being disrespectful. I know that assertive women scare you, Gary. I know. Because you're used to women like Shani bossing you around, telling you what you can and can't do, turning all over your money to her. So that makes you extremely uncomfortable. But, I mean, it's not an excuse to behave the way that you did, boy. You went crying, running away. You had to insult me before you left, and then you had to make a stream crying about it because you couldn't handle the fact that a woman was telling you not to be disrespectful. I know that's the big scary, but you're going to have to learn to deal with it. He is a very stupid man. Gary is not an adult. No, he absolutely does not behave like an adult in any way, shape, or form.
The bottom line is, at the end of the day, even my Bible teaches that there are other gods. However, we call them false gods. We call them idols. We call them things masquerading as gods, but they're really demons or whatever. You know what I mean? Even my Bible teaches me this.
So
this is what happens when you're ignorant about other religions and you only know about Christianity.
We weren't talking about other religions, Gary. You were trying to divert from the fact that you don't have evidence to support that your God exists. So you want to dive off into all these other religions in the hopes that I don't understand them, so that you can throw the topic off and you don't have to be held accountable for your own claims. That's just not how that works. You believe in the Christian God. You believe the Christian God is real. Prove that your Christian God is real then. Show me some empirical evidence that you have this imaginary relationship with this imaginary deity that exists somehow out of time and space. How does that work exactly? Is that how you learn how to mind read? And you can tell what other people believe, you know, regardless of what they say to you. You can read their minds and you know what they really believe in their hearts. Is that how that works? Your imaginary friend tells you?
Absolutely hilarious.
Yeah, so, yeah.
Lady Haven, I got you a Kleenex here. Learn how to formulate an argument. Okay, learn how to formulate an argument. All right. If the atheist is going to sit there and say no one's ever proven to you that a God exists, you should probably know what the word means.
Okay, so here he is chastising me about saying, not wording my argument properly. And I got to give him that, because there was a point in the stream where I did say no one has proven a God exists. And I should have clarified and said that no one has proven a God exists to me personally. I am not convinced. But here he is kind of throwing it up, saying that I shouldn't be saying that because why? Because there's other pagans out there that believe that their gods exist. How is that relevant to me? How is that relevant to me? Because not only have I not seen any evidence of any Christian God, I have learned extensively about Islam. No one's ever shown me any evidence that the God of Islam is real. I studied pagan religions. No one's ever shown me proof that a pagan God exists. Right? So do I not get to sit down and claim that I have not been shown any evidence for any gods unless I've gone through every single God that man has ever worshipped, and I can confidently say no one's ever proven that God exists? My own personal belief. Like, if we're going to play semantics here, Gary, you got to stick to it. You got to stick to your own argument.
The definition, if you look up the definition like she did, and it's telling you that a God is an object of worship. That is a superhuman being.
Okay, now see, he's turning this around, because that wasn't part of the definition that we were talking about. Actually, I'm going to see if I can pull it up. I can type. Yes, I can. The creator, the ruler of the universe, and the source of all moral authority, the supreme being. So even when I pull up the Oxford definition, it doesn't include worship. A superhuman being or spirit worshipped as having the power over nature or human fortunes, a deity. So I pulled up a different definition in Google, obviously, but this is the definition that we should have gone through. So knowing what I know now, if let's just say a pagan came to me and said that they worship the sun as a god. Okay. Well, we know what we know already about the sun and it being a star. How do you define that as a god? How do you see that as God? So, I mean, that would trigger some good conversation about this. But in this definition of God, where does the sun, fall in those qualities, right? So how would the sun be a superhuman being or spirit? Where's the evidence of that? How does the sun have power over human fortunes, or the creator or the ruler of the universe? How is the sun the source of all moral authority? Right? So, I mean, for next time, obviously I know better for next time, but hindsight's 2020 when it comes to these types of arguments, right?
Then in order for you to have a sound, logical argument to say that thing is not a god, you got to be able to define the term and show why those things are not those things. And atheists cannot do that.
Lots of atheists do that. It's just me. I messed it up because I'm not experienced when it comes to having conversations with obnoxious pricks like you. Dictionaries are rarely useful for settling disputes and word uses. There really isn't a right and a wrong. There's usage. Okay. G-Man's use of the word atheist, for example. Yeah, that's true. That's very true. That's something that I'm going to have to kind of look more into then, I suppose. But, I mean, again, it just kind of makes more of a point why you need to define what a god is at the beginning of a conversation so that you're both on the same page. G-Man's once thought chickens were single-celled organisms. What? Really? Oh, that's disappointing.
Too busy trying their hardest to stay away from their burden of proof. The other argument that I wanted to point out to Lady Haven, whatever the heck her name is, I think it's Lady Haven, that I wanted to point out to her was this. The difference between an atheist and a agnostic. Atheism is really positive atheism at the end of the day. These atheists that claim that there's no such thing as a God, they can't prove that there is no God. They have a faith that God doesn't exist. They demonstrate that they have a religion, okay? An agnostic is somebody...
It's amusing that he's got to use religion in this way. And I posted about this on Twitter today, is that believers, theists, particularly like ones like Gary, who can't really kind of grasp the concept how people can lack a belief in something, they then turn around and they have to equate it to their theism, right? So even though we don't believe in their God or we don't practice their religion, that must mean that something else in our life must be our God and must be worshipped, right? So, and then they turn around and they use it almost like it's an insult, right? Like, you atheists, you actually have a religion, your atheist religion. And they use it because they know that some atheists do get offended when they say that. So they're using what they practice as an insult. So you're comparing us to you guys and want us to see that as detrimental. That doesn't really make sense, right? But this is something that I come across so often, so often, that I can't wrap my head around the fact that you don't believe in a God. So in order to deal with that, I have to tell myself that you actually really do believe in God, even though you say that you don't, so that I can comprehend what you're talking about. That you're just, you just want to be able to sin. You want to be unrighteous. You want to be evil. So you really believe there's a God. So you lie about it so that you can do all these things. And it's just like, so that they can kind of somehow understand why we are the way that we are, instead of just kind of really sitting down and talking to one of us and seeing where our point of view is. Because just because I don't believe in your God doesn't mean I need to replace that with something else in my life. I don't need to worship something bigger than me in order to get through my day-to-day life. I'm quite content without it. Just because you have to live your life that way doesn't mean that I have to. Why is that so difficult to understand?
Somebody that goes out there and says that I don't know if God exists, or they don't believe that it's possible to prove that God exists. It has to do with knowledge. Whereas an atheist just goes out there and just make this stupid claim like Bugs Bunny going, "That's all, folks," or whatever, whoever does that or whatever. And they go out there and they make
Porky Pig, you dumbass. Petty Fam in the chat. Oh, awesome. Hi. I mean, it's fine that he uses words this way, but it's not necessarily how others use them. Yeah, that's true. And again, that's what Drag said when he reviewed the video, is that I should have, and in the future, absolutely should, before we start the conversation, define what a god is so that we can be on the same page. And, you know, and I should know that because I've seen atheist experience do it so many times where you gotta set the stage for, okay, what are we talking about? Let's make sure we understand each other's terms. Like, I know better, but I didn't, you know. I tell him that all the time. By his usage, I'm an agnostic. Doesn't change my beliefs or assertions. Yep. Hey, Jeff, how are you? The Afrohumanist is reviewing something you did with G-Man Live right now. Oh, yes, she told me. Esther was here at the beginning of this. She's reviewing the stream I did with Gary the other day. You know what? Let me tell you, this is very surreal to me because I watch all of these channels kind of like I have in the background for a really long time. So, you know, when people like Drag and Jules and now Esther are all reviewing my video, I'm just kind of a little starstruck back here going, these are all the channels that I enjoy watching and now they're talking about me. I don't know how to handle this because I don't really throw myself out there a whole lot, you know, and I didn't really anticipate getting so much attention because I had Gary on my channel. I mean, I'm happy about it, but let me tell you, hearing my voice on the channels that I enjoy watching very often is it's super cringe. It's super cringe to hear my voice on other people's channels. Hi, Robert. How are you? Yeah, you know what? YouTube's really bad at notifying me, you know.
Claim that God doesn't exist. God doesn't exist. How do you know? No one's ever provided any. Stop it. Stop it. If I start playing videos of atheists leaving atheism for Christianity because their burden of proof was met, then you all would be saying something different. This is
because what convinces somebody else may not be convincing to me. It's almost like he doesn't really grasp that burden of proof can be different for different people, right? Like that standard of evidence, obviously between he and I, is very, very different. So what has convinced him that his God is real is very different than what might convince me. He doesn't really seem to grasp that. And I should have done a better job of articulating this in our discussion, but I have not been provided with evidence that convinced me that any gods exist. Any gods. And that is why I'm an atheist. And the thing is, I made it very clear to Gary that if I was presented with evidence that was convincing, that I was very open to changing my mind. But I haven't come across that yet. Right? So I'm open to learning new things. I'm open to see and discuss other kinds of evidence for gods. You know, I'm not so shut down that I'm not, you know, going to consider absolutely anything. Like I've made up my mind, there is no God. That's it. I'm not considering anything. No, I'm very open to reviewing other things that may be convincing. But so far, I have not been convinced. And that's just me personally. And I'm sorry if you don't accept that, Gary, but that doesn't mean that in the back of my mind, I actually do believe in your God and I'm just suppressing it. Like, that's just stupid. You've got no way of knowing that, Gary. To be fair, there's a lot of people throwing around the term burden of proof and don't really understand what it means in all different contexts. Yeah. Yes, this is very true.
Why I constantly call atheists stupid. What kind of an intelligent person gets involved in the discussion about whether or not something exists without defining your terms? If I had a discussion with you about aliens, right? And I said that that the aliens existed, and you say, well, I don't believe that there's life on other planets. I'm gonna say I wasn't talking about life on other planets. I was talking about life in other countries. I was talking about illegal aliens. Then you will look stupid for not defining your terms first. You have to define your terms.
I get it, Gary.
Words have more than one meaning.
You've been talking about this for quite a bit.
And not everybody who believes in a God is describing a supernatural deity. For example, and this is going to go right over the heads of the atheists that are watching this. So if you're a Christian, you're going to know what I'm talking about. How many of you watch ESPN? How many of you watch Stephen A. Smith talk about LeBron James, Kevin Durant, and these guys sports. And whatnot?
I'm totally
and they use religious terms like blasphemy and things like that, right? Things that are usually reserved when we're talking about religious things. It's called hero worship. Kevin Durant has said on multiple occasions that he is a basketball god. Atheists will giggle and laugh. Yeah. Oh, you're not a god. Why are they giggling and laughing? They're working on the definition of the Christian God.
It is, Todd.
That's what they're working on. They're not looking at any of the other religions that's out there or the definitions that they're using. So it's absolutely hilarious as listening to these atheists claim that something doesn't exist without first defining your terms. You look stupid when you do that. And I'm convinced that most atheists do not know what a God is at the end of the day. That's why when we ask them, we say, what evidence is good enough to prove to you that a God exists? And you want to know what they say? Well, I really don't know. What if he shows up? What kind of a dumb answer is that you don't know? Well, I could be hallucinating.
Well, I can't tell the future, Gary. I can't do things like tell the future or read other people's minds or, feel physically what they're feeling. So how am I supposed to be able to tell you what in the future might convince me that your God is real? Please explain to me how I'm supposed to know that. Because that question has always baffled me. Like, what kind of evidence would convince you? How? I don't know. It hasn't happened yet. So how am I supposed to know that? And it all kind of boils down to, if your God exists and your God wanted me to believe, he would know exactly what would be required to convince me. He would know, right? Because he knows all of us, right? He knows all of our hearts. He knew us all before we were formed in the womb, right? So he would know exactly what it would take to convince me that he is real. Seeing as your God hasn't done that so far, he either doesn't give a shit about my belief, doesn't want my belief, or what makes more logical sense, he doesn't actually exist. So, I don't really get how you're not surprised that I don't know what evidence would convince me. Sure, if God came down right now in front of me and said, "Hi, Mindy, how are you doing?" that would probably be convincing enough for me. Now, I wouldn't be able to turn around and use that to convince somebody else because that is anecdotal, right? That's my personal experience. I can't use my personal experience to convince somebody else. But for me personally, yeah, that would probably convince me. I'd probably still have some questions, though, oh, what might be going on in my brain? Have I taken any drugs today that might make me hallucinate, right? So there's a lots of other things that I would need to factor out first before I 100% believe that it was God. But if it was God, it probably would be pretty convincing to me. But I don't know that for sure because I'm not in that situation and I can't tell the future. So I don't know why you expect me to be able to know these things, Gary, when it's impossible to know them.
I could be in the Matrix. How do I know I'm looking at a deity? Well, you're not an atheist no more. Now you're a denialist. As I do,
right? Yeah, I know.
At that point, you're a denialist.
When I first kind of went on my atheist, because I've been an atheist my entire life. That's just the conclusion I've come to. I've been an atheist my entire life. I did dabble in other things, but I didn't really learn what it meant to be an atheist up until probably just before the pandemic. And I started my YouTube channel and I really started exploring what it meant to be an atheist. So that's actually how I found Drag. Is he was a host on AXP, and that led me back to his channel. And then I started watching his channel and he was doing Shanny streams. And that's how I found Shanny, which ultimately led me to G-Man. So, but anyway, I started watching AXP. I watched Talk Heathen. I watched a lot of shit. And I started my channel. I started kind of dipping my toes into the atheist community here on YouTube. Like in 2020, I did a lot of appearances on like Your Friendly Neighborhood Atheist. I was on the Atheist Morning Show. So I kind of got my way around and learned the arguments. It really taught me about some of the atheist arguments. I had no idea when I started talking to Christians on Facebook. I didn't even know what burden of proof was. I didn't really even understand what that was. So I didn't understand what logical fallacies were. So this is just all some stuff that I have really learned in the last 2.5, 3 years. So I'm still fairly new, not very good at arguing. But I think I have been an atheist my entire life. I just didn't have the right language for it. I didn't really know what it was. And I spent a good portion of my life not even thinking about religion or God because I just wasn't interested. And yet here we are. Oh, it's Billy, my favorite. Hi, Billy. Ask him for a syllogism for his argument and break his brain. Yeah. I don't think that I'm ever going to be able to have a conversation with Gary again. Not really interested unless I'm going to do what Jules does, and that's just to troll him because there's no point. It's just a waste of time. I haven't watched AXP in a long time. Yeah, I stopped watching it a while ago. I'll watch it here and there. I don't watch it like every Sunday like I used to. I'm not late. Hello, husband. I was actually just going to close it up because I've been streaming for an hour. So you're just going to have to go back and watch it. So I think what I might do is I might do a part 2 and we'll cover the rest of this video. I don't know how many of you keep up to date on what Gary does or how often he streams, but good fucking Lord. He did a stream. I think it was last night he did a stream. And that is something I definitely want to take a look at because it was pretty out there. He was talking about endorsing the oh Jesus Christ, I forgot their names. Westboro Baptist Church. He was talking about endorsing the Westboro Baptist Church and it's putting them out there. Like it was bad. It was bad, some of the shit that he was saying. He was using homosexual slurs. Is this a normal thing for Gary to like be that out there? I was pretty kind of taken aback because I was sitting here going, oh, maybe I should stream this instead. But some of the shit that he's saying on his channel, I don't know if it's even something that's going to be allowed to stay up. I know he had a channel that had like 10,000 subscribers that got taken down. I would imagine it was because of bullshit like this. But I was sitting here honestly with my mouth open going, how the fuck is he getting away with saying all this shit? And he's talking about starting another channel on like Twitch and talking about he basically wants to attack the LGBTQ, support taking away their rights. And he wants to do this on Twitch now, which that's kind of funny because there's no way Twitch would ever allow that. He'd be shut down so fast. But yeah, it's kind of bad, but it is something that I do kind of want to take a look at because I didn't know that Gary was this level of crazy. I really wasn't. I'd suggest watching Answers and Reasons if you want to dive a bit further into these topics than AXP goes. Yeah, my husband and I, once we do, like, because the next couple of weeks in my life personally are going to be absolutely freaking nuts because I have my visa interview coming up next week. Hopefully going to be finding out how soon I can move to PA. So my life is going to be chaotic for the next couple of weeks. But my husband and I have talked about how we want to sit down and kind of really look at philosophy and the philosophical arguments for God and things like that, and just kind of like learn. Drag has suggested that I start taking a look at and learning about epistemology, which I want to do. So I have a lot of my plate that I want to cover. So hopefully I can get to that. G-Man might have better luck with sororities. Where at the end of the premise becomes the beginning of the next. Oh, requires less intelligent. Like the Westboro Baptist Church would ever accept him in, right? Like, I mean, if you want to endorse such a hateful group of people that they protest at, soldiers' funerals, yikes. Like, why would you willingly say that you're going to support and lift that up? That's just, wow. I'm sure his Jesus would be so proud. So proud. But anyway, thank you so much for watching, guys. I'm going to call it for now here. What I might do is I might pick it up tomorrow and we'll do the second half, either tomorrow afternoon or tomorrow evening. Give my husband something to watch while he's at work. Everybody say hi, husband. All right. I love you all. You're all amazing. I will talk to you again soon. Bye.